Well, Marcus Papadopoulos, he's the editor of the Politics First magazine. He's also a commentator on Russia and the Balkans. He's here to discuss this more with me live from London. Marcus, as we've been hearing, so many concessions along with an amnesty, a truce, and nothing seems to be stopping these protesters. The ultimate demand, of course, is for the government to step down. If it did, would we still then see the radicals leave the streets?
Absolutely, we would. But if I can just take it one step back, the Ukrainian government has given numerous concessions over the last few weeks to the opposition. The Prime Minister has resigned, a new government is to be formed, a somewhat controversial law concerning protests was repealed. What else can the Ukrainian government do? Ultimately, the opposition and the armed opposition, as it is now, they want power. They want to take power from a democratically elected government. And for EU foreign ministers to not be condemning what we have seen this week in Kiev is absolutely appalling. It's intolerable, but it's not a surprise because these are their people on the ground in Kiev. These are their people that will achieve a geostrategic objective. And the geostrategic objective of the United States and the European Union is to tear Ukraine away from Russia, to bring it into the West's orbit in order to complete the encirclement of Russia on its western borders.
All right. Apart from the wider picture, what should happen now, though, to end this violence? Sanctions from the EU, the US, will they push the Ukrainian government to find a solution?
Well, what right does a government have to impose sanctions on another country, to impose sanctions on a government that happens to believe that its economic pathway lies with Russia as opposed to the European Union? Who gives them that right? That's not in accordance with with international law. It's not in accordance with the mechanisms of the United Nations. The only way that further bloodshed and civil war can be averted in Ukraine is for Washington and Brussels to firstly categorically and unequivocally condemn the violent protests, what we're seeing in Kiev, to violently condemn the militants, what they've been doing in the last 48 hours, i.e. killing, injuring and capturing police officers. And then the next step of Washington and Brussels would be to leave Ukraine, an independent sovereign country, to deal with its own affairs. For the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian parliament to sit down and discuss which is the best option for Ukraine, to join the European Union or to join the customs union of Russia, Kazakhstan and Belarus. Ukraine is an independent sovereign country, and unfortunately the Americans and the Europeans, they only pay lip service to the concept of democracy. What's the evidence of that? The leaked conversation from Victoria Nuland from a couple of weeks ago, and also American politicians and EU officials like John McCain and Catherine Ashton flying into Kiev late last year, joining the protesters in calling for the overthrow of a democratically elected government. Anyone who argues that the West, led by the United States, is genuinely committed to democracy and the rule of law is severely misguided, because that argument is completely untenable.
Marcus, thanks for your thoughts on this. Marcus Papadopoulos, editor of Politics First, as well as Russia and Balkans commentator live from London. Thanks very much indeed for joining us here on RT International.